You are 23 years old and you are good at two things: staying quiet and reading rooms. That's what your uncle says when he gets you the job at the parking garage on Avenida Constitucion. That you have eyes like a cat and a mouth like a priest. And those are exactly the qualities a night attendant needs when the people parking their cars don't want to be remembered. You work the midnight shift. You collect tickets, you make change, you look at nothing. Men in expensive trucks come and go at hours when expensive trucks have no legitimate reason to move. You learn not to register their faces. You learn to exist in a room the way furniture exists: present, functional, unremarkable. 4 nights a week, you do this for 14 months, and you save enough to wire money home to Culiacan, where your mother's roof still leaks through the rainy season. Then, one Tuesday at 3 a.m., 3 men drag a fourth through the service entrance. The fourth man is bleeding from somewhere you can't immediately locate, and he is trying to say something through teeth that have been rearranged. One of the 3 men looks at you with a particular kind of attention that means your decision in the next 4 seconds will determine whether you exist tomorrow. You don't call anyone. You don't reach for your phone. You open the stairwell door and you hold it, and then you stand with your back to what happens next for the 17 minutes it takes to finish. When they leave, you mop the floor. You don't ask whose blood it was. In the morning, a man named Chewy is waiting by your car. He says the señor heard about your composure. He says the señor is looking for someone with composure. He says the pay is 4 times what you make in the garage, with a bonus structure tied to performance and survival, though he doesn't phrase it exactly that way. You say yes. Not because you want this life, but because you already understand with the clarity that only comes from mopping blood at 4 in the morning that the choice was made for you the moment you opened that stairwell door. His name is Ernesto Valdez Ramos, and the first thing you notice about him is that he never sits with his back to a door. You file this observation alongside everything else that will keep you alive. He is 51 years old, controls distribution across 3 states, has survived 2 assassination attempts and 1 federal indictment that evaporated like morning fog, and he is the most frightened man you have ever been in a room with. This surprises you initially. You expected composure at his level. What you find instead is a man whose paranoia has been earned through decades of watching people he trusted put bullets in people he loved, and who has consequently restructured his entire existence around the management of threat. He sleeps in different rooms on a rotation only he knows. He eats food prepared by a cook whose family lives in a house the señor owns. He trusts no one completely, a policy he articulates to you directly during your first week, with the specific intent of warning you that this includes you. Your job, as explained by the head of his personal detail, a former federale named Gerardo, who lost 2 fingers on his left hand and never explains how, is threefold. You stay within 8 feet of the señor when he is outside the compound, you identify threats before they materialize, and you manage his anxiety without letting him know you are managing it. Because the señor does not believe he is anxious, he believes he is rational, and the distinction matters more than you would think. You spend the first 3 months learning his patterns, the way his breathing changes when he feels exposed, the way he touches his collar when someone in the room hasn't been fully vetted, the meetings he holds in cars on the highway because he trusts the motion, believes that a moving vehicle is harder to surveil than a room. You learn to read these things and respond to them before he has to articulate them, because an anxious man who has to ask for reassurance is already more vulnerable than he can afford to be. By your 2nd year, you understand that protecting him is only partially a physical problem. The physical problem is significant. There are at least 3 rival organizations with demonstrated interest in ending his tenure, and at any given time you are aware of somewhere between 2 and 6 active contracts on his life, numbers Gerardo updates you on during morning briefings with the detachment of a man discussing weather. But the more complex problem is informational. The señor receives intelligence from a network of paid sources, family members with conflicting loyalties, rivals angling to redirect his suspicion, and his own increasingly untethered instincts, and your job is to help him act on the right information
and survive acting on the wrong information, because there will always be wrong information, and the wrong information will sometimes arrive first. You watch 2 men get disappeared in your second year because the señor received bad intelligence, and you were not yet skilled enough to question it. You carry both of them with you in a way you don't discuss with anyone.
You develop a system. When new intelligence arrives, a tip about a traitor in the organization, a rumor about a competing cartel's movements, a claim that someone in the señor's inner circle is feeding information to a federal task force, you begin asking questions that seem casual but are architecturally precise. You ask who else received this information. You ask what the source's incentive structure looks like. You ask whether the intelligence is the kind of thing that would benefit someone if the señor believed it. You do this quietly, in the margins of other conversations, because the señor does not want to be second-guessed, and you are not second-guessing him. You are doing the secondary analysis that protects him from the first analysis being weaponized. Gerardo notices what you're doing around month 18 and says nothing for a week. Then he starts CCing you on briefings. This is the closest thing to a promotion you will receive for the next 2 years. The moment everything compounds is a Tuesday in April, year 3. The señor has received information that a man named Beto, who has worked in his household for 11 years, who was the godfather of 2 of the señor's grandchildren, who the señor once described as the only person he would trust to carry him if he were wounded, has been approached by federal investigators and has been talking. The source of this intelligence is a man you have been quietly watching for 6 weeks because his spending patterns shifted in a way that suggested external income. You have not yet told Gerardo because you don't have enough to be certain, and in this world, uncertainty expressed at the wrong time can kill the person you're trying to protect by creating chaos in the wrong direction. But now, the señor is sitting across from you in the back of a moving SUV, and he is asking you directly whether you think Beto is a traitor. And you understand that the answer you give in the next 10 seconds will result in either Beto's death based on false intelligence planted by an actual traitor, or the señor's continued exposure to a man who may genuinely be compromised. You tell him you need 48 hours. You tell him that acting on this information now, without verification, is exactly the kind of move that whoever sent this information wants him to make, and that if the source is clean, 48 hours changes nothing, and if the source is dirty, acting now removes the one person who might lead you back to the federal contact. The señor looks at you for a long time, with eyes that have watched a great many people try to manipulate him, and then he says, "Fine, you have 48 hours." He says it like a man starting a clock. You work those 48 hours without sleeping. What you find is not a clean answer. Nothing in this work ever produces clean answers. But what you find is a partial answer, which is sometimes enough. The source of the Beto intelligence has received 3 wire transfers from an account connected to a rival organization, visible only if you know where to look. And you know where to look because Gerardo taught you, and Gerardo learned from someone who died knowing. You bring this to the señor with the evidence laid out in a sequence that doesn't allow for misinterpretation, and you watch his paranoia temporarily find the correct target, which is almost worse than watching it find the wrong one, because now the correct target knows the clock has started too. By year 4, you are 27 years old, and you have watched Gerardo retire to a property in Sonora, and you are, by default and without ceremony, the primary. You now manage a detail of 6 men, each of whom you selected using criteria you assembled from everything you have observed about loyalty and self-interest and fear, and what makes a person reliable under specific kinds of pressure. You brief them every morning. You change routes without pattern. You control which phones are in which rooms. You track the señor's behavioral anomalies, the way a doctor tracks vital signs. Alert to any deviation that suggests he is acting on information you haven't received, because a paranoid man acting on private intelligence is more dangerous to himself than the threat he believes he's responding to. The señor trusts you now in the way that he trusts anyone.
Incompletely, conditionally, with the sustained suspicion of a man who has been burned by everyone he has ever trusted completely. You understand this is not a failure of the relationship, it is the relationship. You do not want his full trust. Full trust means full exposure, and full exposure in this world is a trajectory that ends one way. What you want, and what you have cultivated, deliberately, with the same patience you once used to hold a stairwell door, is a specific partial trust. The trust that says you are useful. The trust that says you are precise. The trust that says your judgment, filtered through his authority, produces outcomes that keep him alive. This is enough. This is everything in this work. There are things you don't think about directly. You don't think about the people who no longer exist because information you helped evaluate was acted upon. You don't think about the version of yourself who might have saved enough from the parking garage to take a bus somewhere else, tried something else, become unentangled. You allow yourself a single recurring thought about your mother's roof, which has been repaired 3 times now, which will never leak again for as long as you do what you do. This is not a justification. You know the difference between a justification and a fact. You allow yourself the fact, and you do not dress it as anything else. Tonight, the senior is at the compound, and the compound is as secure as a compound can be in a world where security is a gradient rather than a state. You are standing in the corridor outside his room, and you are running through the day's information the way you run through it every night, checking for inconsistencies, flagging anomalies, triangulating sources against each other to find the seams. One of your men has been asking questions that have no tactical purpose. You've noticed it twice. You will decide by morning whether it is curiosity or something worse, because in your experience, curiosity and something worse look identical from the outside, and you cannot afford to discover the difference after the fact. The senior is inside, awake, you know, because the light under the door has not changed in an hour, which means he is sitting in the chair by the window again, watching the dark past the compound wall, running his own calculations about who in his world is at that moment working against him. He is probably right about at least one of them. He is always right about at least one of them. This is what you have come to understand about paranoia when it is calibrated to a life like his. It is not a distortion of reality. It is an accurate reading of a reality most people are not equipped to perceive. Your job is to exist in that reality alongside him, to be the instrument through which his perception of threat becomes a managed condition rather than a consuming one. You are 27 years old. You are very good at 2 things, staying quiet and reading rooms. You are also, now, good at 3 or 4 others, and each of them costs something you can't fully account for yet, because the accounting comes later, and later has not arrived. The light under the door doesn't change. You stay in the corridor. You wait.